Hey everyone, and welcome back to another deep dive. Today, we're going to be looking at something that I think is going to be pretty interesting. We got a really interesting suggestion from one of our listeners to look into the saving habits of Chinese people. Now, when we talk about Chinese people, we're really talking about people in mainland China, and we're going to be looking at a transcript from a YouTube video that really breaks down, how the Chinese save money, how much they save, and the strategies they use. And I got to say, just looking at this right away, one of the things that really jumps out at me is that Chinese households save a ton of money. Like we're talking like 40% or more of their income.
Mhm.
So right off the bat, I'm kind of curious, like, how do they do that?
Yeah, it is an eye-opening figure when you compare it to saving rates in other parts of the world. It really makes you wonder what they're doing differently.
Right? Like what are some of those things that they're doing differently? And the video points to some pretty fascinating cultural roots, like the influence of Confucianism. I remember like way back in school learning about Confucianism
Hmm.
and how it emphasizes things like discipline and, thinking long term. Does that have anything to do with their saving habits?
Oh, absolutely. Confucianism plays a huge role in shaping their approach to finances.
So it's not just about like, being good with money. It's like tied to their whole way of life.
Yeah, you could say that. That long-term thinking that's ingrained in Confucianism, it translates directly into a strong savings culture. It's not just about planning for next year, it's about securing the well-being of your family for generations to come.
Oh, wow. So saving is almost like a responsibility to their family and their ancestors.
It's seen as a way to honor your family and ensure their prosperity and, hard work planning for the future, taking care of your family. Those are all core Confucian values. And saving becomes a natural extension of that.
I see. So it's really baked into their culture.
It's not just philosophical influences either. China's history has also played a significant role. Generations have lived through periods of economic uncertainty.
Yeah.
So it's understandable why preparedness and financial stability are so highly valued.
So I think they've learned from experience that you got to be ready for anything.
Exactly. And that kind of historical memory shapes their financial behavior even today.
So we've got this mix of cultural values and historical experience that's created this like incredible saving culture.
Yeah.
But it's not just about like, having this mindset. They actually have some like specific strategies they use. And the video highlights three key ones. The first one is frugality as a lifestyle. Now, we hear a lot about frugality these days, but the video emphasizes that it's not just about being cheap. That's a whole different mindset. What's the Chinese approach to frugality?
Well, think of it as mindful spending. It's about being intentional with your money, recognizing the value of what you already have.
So it's not about deprivation. It's more about making conscious choices.
Exactly. It's about prioritizing needs over wants. The video gives some great examples, like cooking at home instead of constantly dining out, or resisting the urge to buy every trendy gadget that hits the market.
Oh, yeah, those are definitely things we can all relate to. It's so easy to get caught up in, wanting the newest thing.
Absolutely. But it sounds like the Chinese have a different perspective on that.
Yeah, they definitely seem to have a more like long-term view. Okay, so frugality, that's one key strategy. What about the second one?
Now, the second one is careful budgeting.
Ah, budgeting.
Yeah.
That's something we hear a lot about. But I'm curious, how do the Chinese approach it?
Think meticulous, detailed, almost like a family financial game plan.
A what?
They're really big on tracking their income and expenses, setting spending limits for each family member,
Yeah.
and planning big purchases well in advance.
It's like they have a system for everything.
Yeah, it's a very organized and disciplined approach.
Well, I'm starting to see a pattern here. Discipline and planning seem to be like key themes.
Absolutely.
Oh,
And that leads us to their third key strategy, which might be the most impactful one, avoiding debt.
wow, avoiding debt. That's a big one, especially in a world where, buy now, pay later is so prevalent. How do the Chinese view debt?
There's a strong cultural aversion to it. Cash payments are often preferred. And if they do use credit cards, they typically pay off their balances very quickly
Yeah.
to avoid those interest charges.
Interesting. So they're not really into like racking up credit card debt.
Not at all. It's just not part of their financial culture.
It's a very different mindset. So we've got frugality budgeting and debt avoidance. That's a powerful combination. And it definitely contributes to that impressive savings rate we talked about earlier. But there's more to it than just those individual strategies, right? The video talks about a specific Chinese method of saving. What makes this method unique?
Well, you're probably familiar with the 50-30-20 budgeting rule.
Yeah, 50% for needs, 30% for wants, and 20% for savings.
Right. The Chinese often flip that script.
Really? They changed the ratio.
They sure do. They aim for 40 to 50% savings.
Wow, that's a serious commitment to saving.
It is. They prioritize long-term goals over immediate wants. They're playing the long game, and it's clearly paying off.
So they're willing to sacrifice a little bit in the present to secure their future.
Exactly.
You mentioned long-term goals. The video specifically highlighted saving for homeownership and education as major motivators for the Chinese.
Right. In Chinese culture, owning a home and providing a good education for your children are seen as essential milestones, almost like societal expectations.
I see.
And the discipline of saving is directly tied to achieving those goals.
It's about security, stability, creating a better future for the next generation.
That's a big part of it.
It's incredible how deeply ingrained those values are.
And this leads us to another fascinating aspect of the Chinese method, the traditional cash envelope system.
I've heard of that.
It's incredibly effective. Imagine physically dividing your income into different envelopes, labeled for specific expenses, rent, groceries, entertainment, and of course a big one for savings. Once an envelope is empty for the month, that's it. No more spending in that category.
That's brilliant. It's like a built-in safeguard against overspending.
Exactly. It takes budgeting to a whole new level of tangibility.
And it forces you to be really mindful of where your money's going.
It does.
Okay, so we've got the cash and envelope system, but the video also mentioned something about digital red envelopes. What are those all about?
Ah, yes. It's a fascinating example of how technology is adapting tradition.
Okay.
These digital envelopes are often used for gifting during holidays or special occasions, but they've evolved to incorporate features for tracking expenses and savings goals.
So it's like a modern twist on the classic envelope system.
Precisely. It shows how the principles of saving can evolve with technology, while still maintaining their core values.
That's a great example of how they're blending tradition with modern technology. It sounds like the Chinese have really mastered the art of saving. But I'm sure our listeners are wondering, how can we apply these insights to our own lives, even if we don't share the same cultural background?
That's a great question, and we'll dive into that right after a quick break.
All right, we'll be right back. Okay, so we've talked about some of the cultural and historical influences behind Chinese saving habits. And we've looked at their key strategies, frugality, budgeting, avoiding debt. But now let's get practical. How can we actually apply these insights to our own lives, even if we don't come from, a Chinese cultural background?
Well, the first step is a shift in mindset. Remember that long-term thinking we talked about earlier? That's really crucial. It's about identifying your big financial goals, the things that really matter to you. What are you saving for? A house, early retirement, your children's education, whatever it is, having those goals clearly defined. That's what gives you motivation and direction.
So it's not just saving for the sake of saving. It's about connecting your saving habits to a larger purpose.
Exactly. Once you have those goals in mind, it becomes easier to make those daily choices that support your savings plans.
It's like having a roadmap for your financial future.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've got our goals. Now, how do we put it into practice?
Well, that's where those practical strategies from the Chinese method come in. Remember the meticulous budgeting they're known for. We can take a page from their playbook, create a strict budget, track our expenses, and identify areas where we can cut back.
The video you shared mentioned cutting down on luxuries. Any tips on how to do that effectively?
Well, it starts with defining what luxury means to you. It's different for everyone. For some, it might be dining out multiple times a week or always buying the latest gadgets. For others, it might be those impulse purchases that we all make sometimes. The key is to be honest with yourself about your spending habits and identify those areas where you can maybe cut back without feeling deprived.
It's about making choices that align with your goals.
Right.
And of course, we can't forget about building an emergency fund.
Absolutely. That's another key element of the Chinese method, being prepared for the unexpected. Having a safety net of 3 to 6 months of living expenses, it can make a world of difference if you suddenly lose your job or face a medical emergency.
Yeah, it's about having that financial cushion. That's something I've been working on myself. And it's amazing how much peace of mind it brings.
It really does. It's about having that sense of security, knowing that you can handle whatever life throws your way.
So we've talked about budgeting, cutting back on luxuries, and building an emergency fund. Those are all great practical tips. But the video you shared also included a really inspiring case study of a man named Li Wei, an engineer from Beijing, who followed those traditional Chinese saving methods and achieved some pretty incredible financial success.
Li Wei's story is a perfect illustration of how discipline and long-term thinking can pay off. He was committed to living frugally. He used the cash envelope system religiously, he avoided debt at all costs, and he always prioritized saving for a home and for emergencies.
It sounds like he really embodied those Chinese saving
He
principles.
did, and it paid off for him in a big way.
What were some of the benefits he experienced?
Well, because of his diligent saving, Li Wei was able to purchase a home with a substantial down payment, which meant avoiding a large mortgage.
Oh,
He also built a solid emergency fund, giving him financial security and peace of mind.
his story is so inspiring. It really shows that you don't need some magic formula to achieve financial success. It's about making smart choices and sticking to them over time.
Exactly. And what's really encouraging is that these principles aren't exclusive to Chinese culture. Anyone can apply them.
Yeah. It's not about trying to become Chinese. It's about taking inspiration from a culture that has clearly mastered the art of saving
Exactly.
and using those insights to empower ourselves financially.
The beauty of the Chinese method is its adaptability. It's about those small everyday choices that can add up to big results over time.
So it's not about making drastic changes overnight.
Right. It's about those little things like making coffee at home instead of buying it every day, or packing your lunch instead of eating out.
Yeah, those are great examples.
It's about shifting our mindset from spend now, think later to save now, enjoy later.
It's about investing in your future self.
Exactly.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive, I gotta say.
Yeah, it really opens your eyes to a whole different way of thinking about saving.
You know, it's easy to get caught up in our own, cultural norms and assumptions about money,
Absolutely.
but seeing how another culture approaches saving.
It can give us some fresh perspective and maybe some new ideas to try out in our own lives.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from this conversation?
That's a good question. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that it's never too late to start building those positive financial habits.
We talked about Li and his story.
Right.
It's really inspiring to see how he achieved financial success through discipline and consistency.
And the thing is, he wasn't doing anything extraordinary. It was just those small everyday choices that added up over time.
Right. It wasn't about some magic formula or get-rich-quick scheme.
Exactly. It was about making a commitment to saving and sticking to it.
And I think that's something we can all do, regardless of our income or our background. So think about this. What's one area of your life where you could apply a little bit of that Chinese-style discipline? Maybe it's cutting back on eating out or being more mindful of your spending habits.
Those are great examples.
Or maybe it's finally starting that emergency fund we talked about.
Whatever it is, just take that first step. Remember, every small change you make can have a big impact on your financial future.
And it's not about being perfect. It's about making progress. Every little bit counts.
Well said.
So on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the world of Chinese saving habits. We hope you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring. Thanks for joining us.